Hello, everybody. Um, as Jenny said, I'm a horticulturalist by trade, so natural dyeing is almost a new thing for me, although I did know all about it, but have looked up lots of details about it and had a go in my own kitchen to see what seems to work best, what we can do at this time of year, and mentioning the sort of plants and things we can use later in the year when the plants start growing and spring is upon us. So you'll see from what I'm doing now, what I've done now are products, materials that you could use now as well. So I've gone through where things have worked, where things haven't worked quite as well, but I've looked up reasons for that too. So let's have a go. And if any of you are experienced at doing this, do um, talk about it at the end of the session, and we can use your experience as well. So what can we use from our larder? Well, there are different groups of colors that we want to produce. So for pinks or reds or purples, some of the things you can use, and I know some of them won't last very long, but you can kind of try them for fun, really. So one of the things is beetroot. I mean, some of these things you'll know because you'll have used these things in your own kitchen and dyed your fingers purple, or your wooden chopping board has been dyed. So that kind of gives you a clue as to what we can use. So beetroot, blackberries when they're in season, avocado skins, which was a whole new one for me, and I did try it. So we'll go over how that works. Red onion skins. So there's a picture of red onion skins. I have to say onion skins were the most successful ones that I used. For yellows, turmeric, the powder that you use in Indian food, which you can get. I worried about should I use turmeric root, which is where it comes from, but actually just using the powder that you can buy in the supermarket is fine. Brown onion skins produces a yellow toned browny color, lovely rich color. Marigold flowers, which I've put a picture of French marigolds there, obviously in the summer, but that's something you could think about growing yourself and then using later in the year. For bluer tones, red cabbage is great, and that did work, although it's not highly recommended because it does fade. But all these colors will fade in the end. So it's just a matter of, whether you accept that as you go along. You can also use black beans. You'd have to get the dried beans and brew them up to use them. I didn't use them on this occasion because time and so on, but it's something you can experiment with. What else can we use? For green tones, which is more difficult at this time of year because we haven't got plants growing, but you can use this information, as I said again later. The tops of carrots, either you've grown them or you buy them with their leaves on. Nettles, so that's a great use of nettles. Nettles are really useful actually in lots of ways. But nettles you can collect as soon as they start growing, you can start collecting them and using them. Goldenrod, which is the flower you can see on the right. Its actual name is Solidago, but commonly called goldenrod. And that's useful. It grows wild. It also grows in people's gardens and is a plant that people have. So that's a nice one to use in the summer. Artichokes, if you happen to grow any, or buy them and you've got the leaves. Or dock leaves, which is a much more common plant that you may well have as a weed in your garden or on your allotment or wherever. So you can use the leaves from that to produce some green dyes. For brown tones, and that again is a much more a winter thing as well, acorns can be used. Walnut shells. Pity it's after Christmas now because we all had sort of nuts that we were cracking at Christmas. It tends to be a tradition, but the walnut shells, if you can keep them and get hold of them, are a good one to get brown tones. Coffee, easy for most of us. I mean by that coffee from coffee beans or from powdered coffee that you get, not instant coffee. tea as well. And you know that because if you ever drop a bit of tea on a white tablecloth or on some clothes, it stains. So that tells you that it's something which you can use, and it's an easy thing to have. Also, as you see the picture on the left, alder cones. So alder trees produce little cones, and you can use those. And often things that we collect from trees, you can also use bark if you can collect bark, have what's called tannins in them, and it fixes the dye more permanently than some of the other products that we have as well. So that's a good thing to use. So what do you need to do this project? Well, you will need some fabric, and the fabric should be a natural fabric and not a mixture with man-made fibers, because man-made fibers are much more difficult to take dyes. So anything that's cotton, so if you have an old white, and white as well is important because you want it to be the lightest color so it will show the dye that you're using. All these natural dyes are quite subtle on the whole. So a white or a really light color is the best thing. So an old sheet that you could cut up, tear up. I've used muslin sheets that I had because they're cotton. If you've got something that's made from linen, that can take it as well. Silk's particularly good, but do we have silk hanging about? Maybe not, but you know, just a thought, you might have an old silk shirt or something. And of course, wool. But I mean, when I say wool, I mean actual wool, not the sort of wool that you can buy, which is made from acrylics and things like that. It has to be proper wool from sheep or naturally collected from animals. So any of those things, natural fabrics are the things to use. And you want obviously natural dye ingredients, and I'll go into that in more detail, but some of the things we've talked about. Now, you can use natural fixatives, and you may have heard of something called mordants, which is a way of holding the dye on more permanently. So if you're doing this perhaps with your group and you really don't want to go into complicated things, you can use natural fixatives, which mean you treat the cotton or material or fabric you have so that they're ready to take the dye. They're better absorbing the dye. And there's lots of discussion online about which ones are best, what should you use. So if you start searching it, you'll come up with a million different thoughts from people, some criticizing, not criticizing each other, but disagreeing with each other on what you use. One of the sites that I looked at said if you're using berries, then salt is a good fixative. If you're using vegetable material, then vinegar would be something. So again, I'll go into that in more detail in a bit. Probably gloves are a good idea. So those thin gloves that you can put on so that you don't dye your hands because it's easily done. Now, what do you make your dye in? Again, disagreements in looking up different things and researching it. Generally, if you use a steel pan, and it says an old steel pan, well, frankly, I've only got steel pans that I use for my cooking. I don't have an old one. So I just use those. And actually steel's good because it doesn't absorb the dye, so it's easily cleaned off, including, I have to admit, the first dye pan I did where I put in avocados and water, and they have to brew for an hour, and I walked away from it and then forgot about it. So unfortunately it dried on, but even that in the steel pan cleaned up really easily. But other people suggest that aluminium pans give off a little bit of aluminium, which is what's used as a mordant, as a real fixative, and therefore that fixes the dye on the fabric better. But I haven't used an aluminium pan, so I don't know whether the actual pan absorbs the dye as well, but you have to use what you've got. You can use the wooden spoon because you do need to stir around the ingredients and also the fabrics, but the wooden spoon will absorb the dye. I just use steel spoons that I have normally, and it was fine. And they clean up perfectly because they don't absorb any color. tongs are really useful. And again, if you've got metal tongs to take the fabric out of the pot, that's really helpful too. And you will need a sieve. And again, metal sieve is better, as fine as you can get, to sieve out the vegetable material that you're using and produce a sort of nice liquor that you're going to dye from. Okay, so those are the things that we need to have. Now, what are we going to, sorry, I'm just going to click off that because it's right in my way. Okay, so we're going to make our dye. Now, I'm going to go into more detail about actual vegetable dyes, but this is a just generic introduction into how you make your dye pot. So you need to chop up whatever ingredients you're going to use into smaller pieces, because then they'll release the color in them. And you're going to place them in the pan that you've chosen. You're going to cover the ingredients with water. Again, if you look up and research, some people say 2 times the amount, some people say whatever. I kind of realized that probably you absolutely need to cover, obviously, the ingredients, and then with a little bit more, so say an inch or 3 centimeters more, because I didn't want to put too much water in because I didn't want to thin it out too much. But I needed to put enough so that as it boils for an hour, it doesn't disappear, although you're not boiling for a whole hour. So you normally, and this is a general thing, so I'll go into more specifics in a bit, bring it up to boiling point with the ingredients, and then in some cases, some things want to be continue to be boiling, whereas other things want to be heated up, but not to boiling point. But basically, as a general rule of thumb, you bring it up to the boiling point, then you turn the heat down so that it gently simmers for the rest of the hour. And if you can, get it to a very gentle simmer for an hour. So generally you have to cook it for an hour. So you have to be prepared that you have to have that time. And I realized, having burnt my first lot, that I had to sit in the kitchen to remind myself to stir it from time to time, to check the water level was okay. So I just made sure I had another thing to do for that hour when I was still close to what I was doing. Once it's been cooking for an hour, I left it to cool so that any of the dye comes out, so that you get the most from the materials you're using. And then you need to strain whatever it is through a sieve, or if it's something like turmeric, where it's a very fine powder, you need to use a muslin or a bit of material, maybe a coffee filter, paper coffee filter would be useful. And you sieve it through, but it's fine for, obviously, for bigger vegetables. A normal sieve is absolutely fine. So once you've done that, so I did it into a jug, and then either you could put it back in the pan and carry on the dyeing process, or if you need to break off at that point, you can put it into a jar. As you see, I've done some there. Seal it, just label it so you remember, because some of the colors are very similar, so you might forget which one's which. And then if you need to store it, put it somewhere dark, away from light. So I just put it into a cupboard that was in a cool place. You could put it in the fridge if you like. And in fact, putting it in the fridge is what you do if you're keeping the dyed liquor for a long time, or a longer time anyway. So that's good. And as I said, I just put some labels on with the names on. So preparing the fabric, this is where we get down to the idea about, do we use a mordant? Do we use a fixative? What do we do? But generally you need to do something with the fabric, especially if it's new fabric, because often new fabric has been sort of coated. And so even if you just wash it at a hot temperature, just to break down anything that's covering the cotton is a good idea. If it's old fabric, it needs to be clean. So you need to treat it. So as I said before, choosing a white or a light fabric is really the best you can do. And any patterns you have will probably show through, because vegetative dyes are quite light in comparison to the sort of dyes you buy from a shop. where they can dye over things quite strongly, what you're going to be making is not as dense. So unless you don't mind having the pattern, maybe you think it adds to the interest. So you've chosen that, you've made sure if it's new, you've washed it, then you need to fix it. So fixing it is boiling it. This is all quite long-winded, but it is going to help make sure that the dye fixes on it. So I took from this, from my research, some ideas about how you fix it. So what I did, because everything I used was vegetable based, I boiled up my fabric, my muslin, in a mixture of 1 part vinegar and 4 parts water. So I boiled it up and let it, simmered it, well, maybe an hour, maybe less. I don't know. They say for an hour, so that's why I've put. And then you can remove it, let it fix, and rinse it with cold water. So I basically boiled it up, let it cool down, and then I rinsed it with cold water. I didn't want to use it straight away, but that's fine. You don't have to. So I just, when I did use it, I just wet it again with cold water. But obviously, if you're in the routine, you can go straight into putting it into the pot. If you're using berry-based dyes, so blackberry or whatever like that, it's recommended to use salt to 16 parts water. I didn't do any berries, so I haven't actually tried that, but this is what's recommended. So thinking about, we're going to go ahead and start dyeing. What do we need to do to prepare, apart from the things I'd itemized before? It's a good idea to cover your working area with newspaper or old sheets or something, because you may drip your dye and you don't want to have that around the house or around your carpets or whatever. So you're going to cover things, and you're going to prevent dyeing your fingers and hands with gloves. Thin gloves, so that you can do everything easily. So we've prepared our fabric, we've prepared our vegetables or whatever material you're using, and we've got a liquid now, which is the dye, which is put back into the dye pot. And so you put your wet fabric in there, and then you can warm it to a gentle simmer and leave the fabric in, either at a gentle simmer or just in the hot water. But I think this comes from experience and experimentation. I found that red cabbage didn't seem to affect the material very quickly, so I left it in longer. Whereas some of the other things like the onion dyes I did were quite quick. The turmeric was quite quick as well, but we'll go on to that in a minute. So, but generally you bring it up to the temperature and then you can leave it in that hot water. Some of them I left overnight too, just because I thought you keep looking at the fabric to see whether you think it's dark enough. So the longer you leave it, the better it is. Or you bring it back up to the hot temperature again and then leave it. So as I said, you leave it until it gets to the required depth and color. And remembering that when it's wet, when you look at it, it's darker than it will be once it dries. So the more depth you want, the longer you leave it, and so on. When you've decided you're ready, that's it. You rinse the fabric in cold water and you just dry it naturally. So you don't put it in a tumble dryer or put it in the bright sunshine, although some dyes react to sun, some fade in the sun. So until you really know by experimenting, I found I just dried them away from the sunlight. Also, it's winter, so I dried them in the kitchen, just on the side where they could dry naturally. And then again, you can keep using the dye that you've just used for a few times. So you can put the liquid, any liquid you've used, back into a jar, seal it, and again, maybe you put the date on it, would be a good idea. But apparently some dyes will last up to 6 months, some a few weeks. So If you want to keep it, put it somewhere dark and cool, or a refrigerator, obviously, because that's dark. But you might as well, since it takes quite a long time to make, you might as well keep using it as much as you can. And the other thing you might want to do is, if having dyed the fabric, if you think it fades after a few weeks, you could put it back in to the dye pot again and re-dye it. So everything's possible. So what did I do? Well, I dyed both with red and brown onions. I don't know why I put all, because I did both. So what did I do? Well, I got bags of onions, of course. And at first I thought with brown onions, I'll just, every time I use an onion, put the skin, the dry skin, the colored skin, to one side in a bowl, and I'll just keep collecting it. And then I realized this is going to take far too long, that I didn't cook enough with onions. So actually, of course, you can rub off the outer skin, and the onions will still store fine in your cupboard or wherever you keep them. And so you can just rub off, and it's quite a fun job, actually. So it's something, perhaps, if you've got people who are not able to do more things, can easily rub off the skin with their thumbs. Very easy to do. So you can collect them. So obviously, if you're dyeing red or brown, you keep them separate, because they're both going to produce a different color of dye. So rub that off. Now, how many? I did probably about 10 red onions, and they weren't huge, they were kind of medium sized. Whereas I did less brown onions, half a dozen. But of course, it depends on the quantity of fabric you're having to dye. Because if you can imagine, you just cover the amount you've got with water, you can kind of gauge how much fabric you could then put in it. So if you're just doing it experimentally and you've got small pieces of fabric, you don't need a lot. If you're doing a t-shirt, or, as I might suggest later, a fabric bag, the fabric bags you go shopping with, you're going to need more. So you have to work it out. There isn't it's not an exact science at all, but it's easily done, and they give off such wonderful colors. I would definitely recommend doing red or brown or both onions, because they are very successful, and they really were the best, I think, that I did. So you've rubbed off the skins, you've broken them up a bit so that you haven't got big bits, because the smaller the better, and you put them in a pot, and then you cover them up with water. And I probably didn't go much above the level of the skins, maybe half an inch, centimetre, something like that. Brought it to the boil, and I simmered it for about an hour in both cases, left them to cool down. I think I probably left them both overnight, because I thought, well, it's always a good sort of backup to do that, because you're not having to watch it. It can do that, and the next day you can go on to the next stage as well. You can drain it through a sieve, obviously, and in this case you don't need a muslin, because they're big bits, and you haven't got any bits of the actual onion in there. And then you can return it to the pot. Now, unfortunately, when I photographed them and put it onto this, I think the colors get a little bit washed out, because the color of the brown onions was a really lovely orangey browny color, not very dense. So the way it's come up, and I've got the two of them side by side here, you can see the red onion is much denser. It's come this lovely sort of reddish purple color, whereas the brown onions are a little bit lighter, but it really is more bright than it looks in that photograph. But they were so easy to do. I'd already prepared the muslin, as I said, and they were wonderful. So I think if you want to do something that's absolutely successful and everyone's really happy about, those are the ones to go for. And also you've got onions, and you can use them for cooking. So it's not a difficult material to get hold of or to use. So I was very pleased with those. Some other things are more turmeric. That's another one. So I read about this, that it produces a yellow dye, as again you can imagine with turmeric. And I happen to have, as probably lots of us do, turmeric loitering in my cupboard with lots of other things as well. And when I looked at them, yeah, they were a bit out of date, so that's fine. I don't need to use them. Although when you research it, it says use the freshest turmeric you can. Well, never mind, mine was 2 years out of date. I don't think it mattered particularly. So, how much do you use? It's that chicken and egg thing, isn't it? I just tipped what I had in those little bottles that you get, and covered it up. I doubled up the water, and maybe I could have added some more actually, because what I didn't realize doing it is that the powder absorbs the water. So it's not like a vegetable where they're sort of cooking in it. The turmeric actually absorbs the water. So you get, it's when you finish, you realize you haven't got much liquor and you've got a lot of sort of stodgy turmeric in there. So you could be more generous with the amount of water that you use, and definitely double it up, if not a bit more. I did bring it to the boil and simmer it because I had no idea how this was going to work. It does give off quite a strong smell, so you might want to open the windows. It's not horrid, it's just strong, spicy smell. I would say, well, you can do it two ways. Once you've done that and you've let it cool, and again, I left it overnight because I just thought, why not? You can either strain the liquid through a muslin, so that takes the powdered form out of it and you just end up with a liquid. Or, because I was lazy and couldn't be bothered to do that stage, I added my fabric to the mix. So it went straight in the pot with all the powder. And I thought, surely you can just wash the powder off after you've dyed. And you can. It's absolutely fine. And I have to say that the turmeric dyed very quickly on the fabric. So I'm put in the fabric. I warmed up the mixture, put in the fabric, and then just left it. I didn't boil it or anything. And for an hour or maybe more. Again, that's where the tongs are helpful, because you can pull it out and have a look and see what you think of the depth of the color. But it is the one thing that came out incredibly strong yellow, lovely golden yellow color. So it was fantastic. Generally, people say that it will fade easily. Sorry, sore throat. But I just think it was such fun and such a glorious color that it was definitely worth doing and very easy. No problems at all. And then we come to avocado, which I thought would be great because I eat avocados. So I thought, great, something you can do with them as well. And there was lots of research about how you get a lovely pinkish color. Excuse me. So I did. Now you need to use the dark avocados, not the green ones, the ones with the blackish skin, because they hold the color. But what you can do, which is useful because you don't eat a lot of avocados all in one go, probably, is as you collect the avocado skins and the stones, because you also, there's color in the stones, you can put them in the freezer and the color will develop a bit more, and it also preserves them while you're maybe having a week of or two even of collecting the avocado skins and the stones. I'd suggest you clean off before you put them in the freezer, clean off as much of the avocado fruit that's inside it, because you don't need that. That's not what you're using, and it would just get in the way of the liquor itself. So put them in the freezer if you can. If you eat loads or you're having a party or there's lots of you, fine, clean them up and cut the skin into small pieces. Including the stone. I was a bit worried about cutting up the stone, but actually you can do it quite easily. It's not as hard as you think. So again, cover with water and heat. Now, what I realized going backtracking, because I ended up with sort of a brownie mix, not a pinky mix, is that if you bring it up to boiling, it can turn the liquid more brown. So I was disappointed that I didn't get more of a pinky dye from it. It's also connected, as is a lot of this, with the pH of your water that you're using. So here in Scotland mostly, and I certainly have soft water, which means it's slightly acidic. If you say were in another part of the country where you had lime and you get lime scale in your bathroom, then your water is more alkaline. And apparently, the more acidic it is, the slightly more browny the dye, certainly an avocado will be. But it certainly makes a difference to an awful lot of what you're doing. You can alter that by adding vinegar or adding other things. But to keep it easy, I just did it with the tap water I have. And as I say, I boiled it, and I hadn't known at the time that probably that wasn't a good idea. So try not to boil it if you're doing it. Just bring it up to heat, keep it on a gentle heat for about an hour again, and then let it cool and drain it through a sieve. And I did find that there was a certain amount of sort of debris in it that I think must have come from the stone. Inside the stone is soft. So, you know, you could drain it through a muslin as well if you really wanted to, or a very, very fine sieve. But I just did it through a normal sieve. I put it back, reheated it, wetted the fabric, put the fabric in, left it for an hour, and I got a rather dull result, which you can see there. It sort of came out, I don't know how you describe it, sort of slightly off, muddy, pinky. So I was very excited. Now I'm not so excited, but it's worth a try. If you eat lots of avocados, you know, you haven't got that much to lose, have you? So it's worth a go. Red cabbage, which I think lots of people know gives off dye, especially when you do it. Even when you just cut it on a wooden board, you get red on the board, don't you? A lot of sites will say, well, it doesn't last very long, but it does give you a wonderful bluey colour. So use a red cabbage, peel off the cabbage leaves, and again, the amount you want to use. I didn't want to do a lot, so I probably used 3 or 4 leaves. 4 probably, I think. Chopped it up in small pieces, covered it with water. Somewhere the research said add salt, so I added a bit of salt. Why not? Bring it to a boil and open the windows, because you've got boiling cabbage, or at least hot cabbage, for about an hour. And I like cabbage, but I don't like it that much. So good idea to let a bit of air through while you're doing it. So dead easy, don't have to do anything. Again, just covered it with water. I think in hindsight, I would have done a little bit more to have enough to produce a lot of dye, having found out how good it was. So you simmer it for about an hour, leave it to cool down, and then put it. One way of finding out whether you got as much dye out of it is to look at the cabbage itself. If the cabbage has lost its colour and has gone to a very lightish purpley colour, you know you've got as much dye out of the cabbage itself. So drain it, put it back into the pot or keep it, and add the wet fabric. It did take some time for the fabric to absorb the dye. So I would suggest that you sort of bring it up to temperature and then leave it in that warm water. And again, you could leave it overnight almost to absorb the dye. It did take a bit longer than some of the other ones. But it did produce, even with this dull photograph, it did produce a fantastic bluey purpley colour. So it was really nice. So even if it's not going to last for too terribly long, it's a great one to do, because what you want is to get a really nice result from any of the things you do. So I'd recommend it. So having done that, I thought I would try and dye eggs for Easter, because Jenny and I had talked about this, and we thought, well, great, we'll use the dye. I can use the dye. So if you're dyeing eggs, you either hard boil them beforehand, so they're solid, or you can blow it where you make a hole in either end and blow the egg through. But that's a little more complicated. So I went to the hard boiled direction, boiled the eggs before dyeing, let them cool down a bit, and added it to the dyes that I'd made before, which I then put back into the saucepans. And you should, well, I heated them up because I thought that was what you should do, and you do get a quicker effect. Heated them up, then let them in the warm water. You can leave them for 30 minutes in cold water. I didn't, and I'm not sure that would work, but it's what some people say. So I tried to dye them. I don't think I was wildly successful. Here is a picture of what I dyed and what dyes I use. So the very dark purpley one on the left is the red onion dye. Now I started off, the other thing I should say is I started off with white eggs. It's really difficult to find white eggs because they're brown, all the ones you try and buy. And I ended up thinking, oh, heaven's sake, I'll go to Waitrose or M&S and see if they have them. Waitrose do white eggs as their essential range, which is their cheaper range. Because if you start off with a brown egg, you're not gonna get such a good reaction from the dye. So these are all dyed from white. So red onion dye is the purpley one. So it's a very dark purple it ended up being. The one at the top is turmeric, and that was obviously a soft yellow. I could have left it for longer and it would have gone a darker yellow, but I didn't want it to end up like a brown egg because it's a bit pointless. So I whisked it out while it was still a soft yellow. The brown onion dye did, of course, what it was going to do and turned it brown. I should have thought about that. So it looks like a brown egg. And the front, which I hoped would work with the red cabbage dye and make it a lovely blue purpley colour. It didn't react very quickly, and somehow when I was messing about with it, I managed to crack the egg, and so the inside of the egg dyed blue instead. So something you can try. Something else that when I was reading about it was if you happen to have any old stockings or tights or something, you can tie the egg up with one of those, which would probably stop them cracking. But you can have a go. So how do you keep your fabric looking good? The fixative that we talked about, you use on the cotton or whatever fabric you've got originally, will fix the dye, but not terribly well. So it's not going to be a permanent dye. So it's probably better to do it on something which you aren't going to wash necessarily. I mean, if you dyed a t-shirt, you know, the idea you wear it and then you've got to keep washing it, it's going to fade, basically. So I was thinking you could make bunting out of the different colors, couldn't you? You're not going to wash that. You could dye a fabric shopping bag because you're not really going to wash that. Or you can think about it, or just do it for the fun of doing it. But it would be a problem if you keep washing. Some people say they don't mind it fading, which is fine. It's up to you. We talked about a fixative and a mordant is the way to fix it much more permanently. But a mordant is something which is a metal that you add, like iron sulfate or aluminium acetate, and you will need to have protective clothing to do it. So that's why I haven't recommended it here, but there is the possibility to do that if you're really into this sort of thing, and it will fix the colors better. Soya milk is recommended as a non-toxic fixative. Again, it won't last forever, but it's something which treats the surface of the cloth. And you can look up how you do that. If you use materials containing tannin, a high level of tannin, so teas, coffees, or the cones I was talking about, the alder cones, or bark has a high level of tannins, that holds on to colours better. Otherwise, it's just the fun of doing it and seeing what colours you end up, and perhaps keeping it away from bright sunlight so it doesn't fade. So those are the things that I did, which I did enjoy doing. And remember that there will be plants coming in the spring and summer, so you can extend your choice of dyes and do all sorts of exciting things as well. So I hope this has been helpful and that you will enjoy dyeing in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Wow. Well, lots of alchemy there, I think. I'm imagining your kitchen completely full of bubbling pots.
It was at one point.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for sharing all that research and experience with us.
Pleasure.
I wonder if we've got any questions at all from anyone. Has anyone got any questions that they'd like to pop in the chat, or just actually use the raise your hand, and then we'll see if we'll see you and be able to ask you to unmute and ask your question. But you have to use the raise your hand. Hello, I think that's Lisa. Lisa, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hello, I'm just really fascinating, absolutely delighted, because it's something that I've been playing around with for years, because my granny used to dye us Easter eggs to roll down the hill. We came from around the lakes, Kendal. It was a big thing, and I'm very old, so we used to do that. But she used to wrap the eggs, the onion skin, and tie that around the eggs, and they'd come out kind of marbleized, and just cook the eggs as usual. So that there's just something that sprung to mind. So what about some lovely memories of scraped knees? Trying not to run so fast, head first down the hill. But absolutely fascinating. I can't wait to get started.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Yes, and a great memory too, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think it's wrapping the eggs protects them. I think that's the thing I didn't do. Absolutely.
No, just completely, if it's one of those things completely forgot about.
Great.
That's lovely. Lisa, sorry, how did she tie them on? Just with string or something like that? How do you tie this?
I'm going back, God, I'm 65, so I'm going back 50 odd years. So there was always a bit of string in the pantry, a bit of group, tie on the, wrap it all up and stick it in the, as just put it in the pot to boil, and then we'd all be marched up to the top of the hill by the to roll our eggs. I mean, the kids today haven't got a clue.
Fabulous. That'd be a nice activity to do, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and it would be interesting to see if it would work with the red cabbage and things like that.
Yeah,
so, but we just do it with the onion skins. So
exactly, but we have other things,
That's a whole new investigation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially if nettles come up before Easter. Yeah. If Easter's late, maybe you've got more choice in the garden too.
Exactly. Find a bit of woad somewhere as well. So.
Oh, there you go. Well, yes, I didn't put in all those traditional things. I thought, where on earth are you going to get it from?
Exactly. But absolutely fascinating. Thank you, because you've really inspired me.
Oh, good. I'm glad.